Sopiko, I'm gonna show you such an interesting Rook Endgame.
Rook Endgame?
Yeah, a Rook Endgame.
Why you're so excited about Rook Endgame?
It's one of the best Rook Endgames I ever seen.
Oh my god, do you mean I have to sit here and watch 100 moves of Rook Endgames, rooks going here and there?
Yeah, tiny little details,
My
but there's
God.
also a mating net that you will love.
Mating net in Rook Endgame?
Yes,
Ooh,
indeed,
that's
in
something
this Rook
interesting.
Endgame.
Are there tactics?
Also, you will have to calculate a lot.
Ooh, then I want to see. You had to start with. So, Pico, I'm gonna show you tactical Rook Endgame.
This isn't a tactical Rook Endgame, it's just one of the most brilliant Rook Endgames you will ever see. So, stay here. The game is Carlsen versus Kracek from the year 2007, and this is a pawn up for Magnus, but it isn't so easy to convert this position into a full point.
It is not so easy. I've seen so many Rook Endgames with 4 against 4 on this side with B extra pawn, but sometimes it ends, most of the times it ends in a draw and black can hold. But what's so special in this game?
Well, it's special for many reasons. We will go step by step. First of all, here it is Magnus's turn, and he makes a very strong move, b7. This is usually a move that you are a bit afraid of making, because once you push this pawn to the 7th rank, you can't move this rook away unless it's with a check, so your opponent will move the king away to f6. Now you can never move this rook, because your opponent will capture your pawn. And also, when you go there with the king, you want to go there to your pass pawn with the king, you reach this pawn, and the opponent will start giving checks and checks and checks and checks, and
That's
you cannot,
the problem
you
of
cannot
Rook
hide
Endgames.
your king there, because with the pawn on b6, when you march there with the king, you have this square, so many arrows, you have this square for the king, so you have a shelter for your king, and then you can promote this pawn with the king. But after b7, which is the strongest move in this position, you don't have the square for the king, but what you gain is that the black rook can never leave the b file. It will not be able to capture this pawn, because then we promote.
Actually, after b7, you have a direct threat, rook e8, so...
Yeah, that's why king f7 is a necessary move. Let's see what happens if the king wants to capture the pawn.
I just wanted to ask you about king d7, because now black wants to go king c7 and grab the b7 pawn, so maybe that's a mistake to go b7. What happens on king d7?
It was a very good choice to play b7, because against king d7, Magnus has rook f8, and in case of rook takes b7, we will capture the f pawn, and this pawn endgame is winning.
Yeah, I think this pawn endgame is very nice, because white has a very nice motive after king f2 and king c6. There is a move I like very much, g5. This is
Very
winning because if you take on g5, then king g3, king g4 is very quick, and black is completely lost. And if you don't take on g5 and play h5, then after g3 and f4, you cannot stop f5 and g6, so it is really bad for black.
Yeah, this is completely lost. So after b7, black is forced to go to f6. But okay, you might think that now there are no checks, and this is what we said, that if the white king marches to c6, comes all the way here. Now I'm not gonna draw all the arrows one by one, I'm sorry about that. So even if we get there with the king, black will just give checks. This is what I was trying to say before, that with the pawn on b7, you cannot hide the king, but there's another plan.
I don't know what you meant with mating net, because the king is on 6th rank. How can you force me to go on back rank to give a mate? That's impossible.
Well, I will not force you onto the back rank. You will get mated on the 6th rank.
My God, that's scary.
You will see. Now, once again, a very strong move, g3, after which you always threaten to break through with f4.
Yeah, I think that's the advantage of double pawns.
In this position, yes.
If we had pawn on h file instead of g file, then there would not be f4 so strong. And now after g3 and f4, the pawns on e4, f4 and g4 will be the winning power.
Yes, for instance, if black lets us play f4, for instance, he plays king g7, after f4 he takes, this is the position you mentioned, we have these
Right.
3 pawns, and we can promote by just pushing this pawn and then the other pawn. So this is the kind of position you can win.
That's already easy. That's that I can also win.
Okay.
I think your
Like
white has
b3?
Yeah, white has two motives of winning. One is to promote e6 pawn and one is to promote f pawn. I like f6, check,
And after king
and
h7?
after king h7, e6. Because if you take on e6, then f7, you can't stop the pawn.
This is very nice. And also the other move was winning.
Yeah.
You can also play e6. And after this, take. The king can never go and stop the e pawn or the f pawn, because then you always know that you have this check and you promote the b pawn.
Yeah.
So the king cannot leave the g7, h7 squares. It has to hide there. And there's no way of defending in this position. There's no move.
Yeah.
Even if you play like rook b6.
Actually, this is the position where pawns win by itself.
Yeah, you don't even need the king. Like, you go f6 anyway, and you have this e6 move even with the rook on the 6th rank, because the rook cannot leave the b file, and if he captures with a pawn, then once again f7 wins.
Yeah, that's really nice.
It is beautiful. So after g3, black is more or less forced to play g5 to avoid f4.
I agree, but g5, after g5, it doesn't seem so scary for black. I still can't imagine how can you give me mate.
Now comes the next part of the plan. You bring the king.
That's logical.
So we're gonna march with the king all over to the, I don't tell you yet which square. We're gonna go through.
Okay.
You'll see. Black could have kept the rook on the 2nd rank, but you will go there anyway, so it's just a matter of time when can we get through with the king and reach the queen side or maybe the king side.
My goodness, that's pretty complicated. So you want to say that after king f1, black has moved what was played in the game rook b1,
Yes.
and has also waiting move?
Yeah, perhaps he should have gone back with the king to g7, and now this kind of position and trying now king e7. It's not an easy endgame to defend, so even if it's possible to hold this endgame, it's like in practice it's almost impossible, because it's a very difficult endgame with tiny little details that will decide at the end. So in some positions the king will have to try to get to the b pawn, in other positions it's just completely lost. So here
there are ideas of f4 always.
Yeah, like for instance here f4, and this is the kind of position that I think in the practice it's just very difficult, because okay, now you have king d7 and the same idea of rook f8. Now here king c7, but anyway, this position is like very difficult.
Yeah, it is difficult because you end up you end up with rook e2, changing the e pawn to f pawn, and white still remains with an extra b pawn, which is on b7. So king is kind of always have to be on b8 to control the pawn on b7. And I think that with precise play, white has very, very good chances to win the endgame.
Yeah, I agree. And imagine that this was the best continuation for black, and even in that case, it's not sure that he would have achieved a draw. So
yeah, but that was the best try, we have to say.
Yeah, the less pawns, the better for black. So if he manages to exchange some of the pawns, at least that would have been good for him. But after rook b1, and well, I think he did not realize that this position is dangerous, because the king can go to c6, c7, but it can never hide behind the pawn. or in front of it actually from this point of view.
Yeah, as you
And
mentioned,
then-
there are a lot of checks and white
Yeah.
has to come up with different plan.
Yes, you cannot keep your king here. To protect the pawn, you will always get a check before you can move the rook. So the idea, the brilliant idea, is that in this position, okay, we go back to c6 first, and then king d7, and we are heading to e8 and f8.
But don't tell me you want to grab h6 pawn, because after that I would give you mate.
No, we are not going to capture this h6 pawn because Sopiko is completely right that let's make some moves like rook b2, and if we want to capture this h pawn, then that's a very bad idea. You can capture it,
Then I see
and
the
then you
mate.
can shake hands with your opponent because you are lost. So in case of king takes h6, you are being mated. Therefore, the idea of all this king march to e8 and then f8 is just that we stop on f8, and once we have the king on f8, look at this. King on f8. The king is in front of the other king, opposition.
Oh my god, I see the mate.
Tell me.
That's brilliant. Wow, so if rook goes like on b3 or b1, so he's doing a waiting move, I have rook c8 or a8, and after rook b7, there is a really beautiful mate.
Mate.
That's gorgeous.
It is, I know. It's an excellent Rook Endgame, one of the most interesting
God.
I've ever seen. So this is the threat, and you can't do anything about it because, well, by moving the rook it's always the same. We're gonna move the rook and either promote the pawn or give mate. And if
You
try
cannot hide because king g6 after king e7.
Sorry. Yeah, if you go to g6, king e7, and now we are heading
Rook
to this pawn.
g8 is big threat for the moment. So if
Yeah,
you
this check
play
is always there, so you
king
have to
g7,
go king g7.
and then you're right after king d6. Eggplant. I'm sorry. It's very, very bad that I have cold and I'm coughing, but I cannot do anything about it. So
She's great anyway. So after king d6, we are threatening to capture on e5, and this is quite similar to the game actually. So we can see what happens in this case from the game. Let's just stay with this position. The idea is king f8, rook c8, rook c6, mate.
that's amazing. Great idea.
So black went back with king g7 to avoid it. But now this is what we mentioned, that in this position white is winning because king d6 was a tempo. So we are threatening to capture his pawn. You have to protect it either with king f6 or with pawn f6. If you protect it with the pawn, then careful. Rook e8 or rook d8. This is
I know what you want already. I know it.
This is the moment when you sacrifice your b-pawn to enter a winning pawn endgame. Equal pawns, 4 against 4, but this is completely winning.
It is, because if you go king g6, I don't go king g6 because then it will be 3 times repetition. But I go
You mean
king
like
f...
you don't want to repeat like this.
Right. But I go king f8. So now the king is in trouble. If he goes on h7, I go king f7 and I grab the f6 pawn. And if he plays h5, then after taking king h5 and king g7, you still cannot protect the pawn on f6.
You can try to swap pawns, but this isn't helping much.
This is very bad because after king g4, e5, king f6 and e5 pawn is falling. So
And this is a queen.
this is a queen.
So even if he goes king g5, this is not a problem because he cannot wait there forever. You have to make a move.
What a brilliant endgame. I think we should also show the importance of pawn on b7 and king on d6, because the distance with the pawn on b7 and king d6 is really short.
That's
so
true.
After
Yeah.
rook e8, if black wanted to give check on b6, then white has king c7. So he's already protecting the b7 pawn and
there are no more
helping to
checks.
promote. This is really nice because if the pawn was on a file, then white would not be able to win with this motive.
Yes, if we imagine this position with the pawn on a7, rook on a2, everything else is the same, just pawn on a7, rook on a2, then black would
have this check
and then capture the pawn, so this motive would not work in that case. Brilliant. This is
very nice. Let's see how it continued.
After king d6, the opponent defended the pawn with king f6, but now
it's time for another idea. And oh my god, I see it already. What do you want? What you meant with the mating net? That's so brilliant. You mean f4, right?
f4. You give back the pawn. You sacrifice this pawn.
That's not giving back the pawn. We just want mate.
And once those pawns are off, like you made him capture with the e pawn, with the g pawn, just to get this position, because in this position
there is a brilliant move which cuts the king from going on g file, and after rook g8 there is a huge threat. e5 mate.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful mate.
It's just a mate. Can you imagine ending this endgame with a mate? And king on f6? Oh my goodness.
I told you will love this endgame.
I love it. I really love it.
So we are threatening e5 mate, and we are threatening to promote our pawn. Black cannot defend against both.
Once again, if black gives check, then king c7 wins.
Yeah, indeed. And if he, well, no, there's no other option. He should give up his rook for the pawn, because if not, he's being mated. So this is what happened in the game, actually.
Yeah, I think Carlsen here still had to calculate a bit, because when the pawn is on 4th rank and the rook is not so close to it, there is always some tricks that maybe king is very fast to defend the pawn and to help to promote it. So after f3, I think this is the brilliant move, what he played next, using the same motive. He is not
c6.
Right. He is not moving his rook to catch the pawn, but after king c6, he creates again the mating net with king d6.
So if black plays f2, let's show it on the board. King d6 again, the same mating net.
Amazing.
And no matter that you queen, e5 is a mate.
I've never seen something like this before.
It's incredible. The king is on f6. You wouldn't expect a king on f6 be mated.
Beautiful.
Just by having one rook on the board. There are no other pieces, just the
beautiful
pawns.
It's so beautiful.
It is.
And
so after king c6, the opponent went to e5, but this position is lost. He gave a check, and then king d5, because if you play f2, then
nice.
he has rook.
That's tricky.
f8.
Rook f8, rook f7, and the
He lets
e-pawn
you
queens.
But at the end, you will capture that queen.
Amazing.
So yeah, it's all over. He played f6, but it's the same anyway. After rook f8, black resigned. If you go back with the king, then he will not promote ever, and he can play like e5, for instance.
Yeah, or he can grab the pawn on g4, we grab it on f6, and then the e-pawn.
Yeah.
We sacrifice the rook for f-pawn, and the e-pawn wins afterwards. Amazing ability of creating this mating net.
Yes, I agree.
So many tactics, so brilliant. That was really wonderful endgame.
I think we should sum up the critical moments, because first of all, he pushed his pawn to b7. It was very important, because if he doesn't do it, if he tries to do the same without that, marching with the king, the problem will be is that at some point black can capture a pawn either on g2, or if we push to g3, then he will capture the f3 pawn or a g3 pawn, because with the pawn on b7 you don't let the rook go away, not even for one single move.
Right.
So b7 was a very important move, and here g3, another important move, threatening to break through.
G3 f4 ideas in this game was really brilliant, and the king marched to f8 and afterwards coming back to d6. That was just really wonderful.
Yes, here threatening this king f8, rook c8, mate.
Mate.
After with the
I
rook
could
c6.
never imagine this type of mate in Rook Endgames. I mean, I've seen a lot of mates, but like this, ooh, that's really gorgeous.
No, this is one of the most special Rook Endgames I've ever seen. So many nice motifs, these little details that make everything change.
Yeah, such precise play. That's just, what can I say? It's just brilliant.
A brilliant Rook Endgame by Magnus Carlsen.
Hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for next games.
See you soon.
Bye.